Phil McGrane, thank you for joining us. I want to start with the question, what are your top 3 priorities if you are elected Secretary of State?
My top priorities as Secretary of State, one, obviously elections is very big, national conversation especially and locally, and just protecting Idaho's elections. I think we have a very good election system, and despite all sorts of efforts to try and change what we're doing, we have a great election system that we need to protect. Similarly, as you know, the Secretary of State is a member of the Idaho Land Board, and protecting our lands in the future and making sure we're managing those endowment lands, both for the current beneficiaries, but also for beneficiaries and Idahoans well into the future, and trying to maximize the return on those lands. And then third is protecting our values. I think as we see so much growth in the state, it's really important that we maintain our roots and maintain the things that are attracting so many people to the state of Idaho. And I think as Secretary of State, there's opportunities to help on all 3 of those fronts.
Okay. And what compels you to run? Why are you running for Secretary of State?
I think, as you know, and welcome Christy and welcome JJ. It's good to see you both. My career has been working with Secretary of State's office. I'm an elections junkie. I frequently talk to folks at the Idaho Statesman and elsewhere about elections. I fell into a job right out of college counting ballots when we still voted on punch cards. And I've worked very closely with Secretary Souza and very closely with Secretary Denny. I've seen all aspects of how that office, the Secretary of State's office, interacts with the clerk's offices around the state to make sure that we have successful, fair elections. And I really, because of my hands-on experience at the ground level, it's given me a lot of opportunity to come up with ideas, both to see what works really well and to see where there's really opportunities for improvement. I think that's especially true right now with the advances in technology that we've seen over the last 20 years. It really has changed how we conduct elections, both in terms of opportunities that technology presents, but also risks that it presents. A great example of that, when I started, we didn't discuss cybersecurity back in 2005. But now, whenever we have a conference, cybersecurity is at the one of the main topics that we always have to discuss and be adapting to. And when you have 44 counties all trying to do this same thing, it really is a coordinated effort. And my experience is the Secretary of State serves as the hub of that entire system. They're not the ones counting ballots or running the polls, but they're the ones providing all the backbone support for every county to be successful. And so I really do see a tremendous amount of opportunity. I've worked really closely with my peers around the state and the other county clerks. And I think collectively, we see a lot of opportunity to really hone Idaho's election system and make it work well. Beyond that, I really do. I'm a 4th-generation Idahoan. I'm very proud to be an Idahoan. I think we have an amazing state. And so just like we were talking before about our lands, like maintaining what brings so many people to the state is so important. And it's really through the leadership at the state level that we see that, make sure that it continues through all of our systems. So whether that's making sure we are working with people who recreate on state-owned lands while also managing things like timber harvest or grazing, and partnering with the business industries that are related to that around the state. There really is an opportunity for leadership here. And it excites me to be able to just help continue the states to prosper well into the future. And I really do. I think hopefully outside of this interview you've seen, I have a passion for this. As I like to joke on the campaign trail, I can either bore or entertain people with elections information. And it's because I just have a passion for this work. And one of the things that I think is really unique about the role of Secretary of State, especially as you meet with candidates, this is an executive branch job where it's a hands-on job. You have to be able to actually perform the duties and the work. When county clerks call the Secretary of State's office for assistance, they're not calling because everything's just going smoothly. They're calling because they need support and help from the state. Our elections are a very complicated system. Everyone pictures just their voting experience when they go to the voting booth at the polls, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes to make that possible. I really want to coordinate so that we can have equal confidence, whether someone's voting in Fairfield or they're voting in Boise. We should have equal confidence that their vote counts, that it counts the same as everybody else's, and that the process is safe, fair, and secure for all the candidates involved. And that's really been my life's work. When I got that first job working here in Ada County, recruiting and training poll workers, I never imagined I'd be sitting before you here today. But I am, because I've continued to do this work and I have a passion for it.
And we're going to ask some specific questions and drill down on some of those issues in follow-up questions. But how would you do things differently from the current Secretary of State? How do you think your office would look differently from what it looks like today?
I think there are a number of opportunities. I think first and foremost, I just want to reiterate that I do believe Idaho has a very good election system. I think the coordination of the counties to pull that together, I think when you look at the recounts and other things that have happened, we have strength in it. They keep reinforming people that, yes, our votes count, that we're counting them accurately. And I only say that because in the narratives we hear today, and probably even in some that you'll have conversations with, we do have a good election system. That said, there really are opportunities to grow and build on what we have. And I think there's some cultural changes in terms of how we review the role of the Secretary of State. As the expectations continue to rise, so does the complexity of the elections. So just to give you a little background and example, my first job in elections here at Ada County was a byproduct of the Help America Vote Act. It was the reaction by Congress to the 2000 election with the hanging Chad and everything that went on in Florida. There was this big reaction and sweeping changes through how elections were run. Prior to that, it was very local. And at the legislature, we would rarely even talk about elections. But as Christy knows, we've had elections legislation perpetually, right? And now with the 2020 election, we see another moment, an inflection point in terms of those rising expectations. New technology being rolled out, that happened in the mid 2000s. That's happening now. One of the things is for the counties to be able to handle that, it's getting more complicated. Before we were sending out punch cards to the polls, it was a paper poll book, there was punch cards. I mean, now we're sending out assistive voting devices that are completely electronic to aid people. We have scanners out at the polls. We have e-poll books that are communicating. Just the technology has expanded, as well as we see with some of the audit efforts and everything else going on, the testing of our system to make sure that it is accurate and fair and secure is happening as well. And that means there's so much more support needed at the county levels. I don't know how familiar each of you are with county clerks and the roles, but county clerks wear a lot of different hats, right? They're running the courts. They're the county recorder. They're issuing marriage licenses. They're the county budget officer. And oh yeah, by the way, they also have to run elections, everything from presidential elections down to sewer district elections, right? And in order to be successful, there's a big difference between the resources, say, here in Ada County than there is in most of the counties. In Camas County or Clark County, Camille is a brand new clerk in Clark County. She individually is wearing all of those hats, right? And so she needs the support to be able to deal with all of these things, especially as it becomes more professionalized in terms of running our elections. And that's where the Secretary of State's office can really step in to provide that assistance. I think cybersecurity actually is one of the best areas that really has highlighted. There's been a lot of grant opportunities specifically from the feds to help support cybersecurity, but sending money to Clark County does not reinforce their cybersecurity, because who do you pay in Du Bois to do that work, right? We need to really have a collaborative effort across the state to support local government and local entities. And I think my work through the Association of Counties and others really helps aid in those relationships with county commissioners, county clerks, and others to bring all of that together so that we can continue to be successful and continue to advance in how we do things so that voters can feel confident, both with that their vote counts, as well as candidates can feel confident that the elections are fair. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Another example too, beyond just that coordinated effort, I think is, I don't know how, Scott, you may have been involved or not. I know the Press Club this year, for example, had legislation trying to advance just getting access to candidate information through the Secretary of State's office. I've been a very big proponent of just open government and transparency. I've spoken and participated in IDOG events to share what transparency can look like in government. I think the Secretary of State's office needs to take a leadership role in promoting openness in government. There's so much data housed, and it really is by default public information. And so being an advocate and a voice, I know Ben Souza was an advocate partnering with Attorney General Wasden when he was in office. And that's something you would really see me do, because it's actually been a frustration point of mine, even as a county clerk, when I can't get the information I need to be able to contact candidates. And I think it goes well beyond that. A point of pride for me, I was talking to a vendor earlier today, but if you guys have visited Sunshine on the Secretary of State's website, it's all the campaign finance information. I was the one who brought forth the idea to consolidate campaign finance information into the Secretary of State's office, right? I had to work with a whole bunch of partners to say, prior to the change in campaign finance reform, there were 79 different entities in the state of Idaho where people were reporting campaign finance information. So for example, if you had wanted to see, who Idaho Power was giving to, you needed to go to 79 different entities and compile all that information. Where now, because of the upgrades and really promoting transparency, you can go to one stop and see all of that. So whether it's someone donating to a county commission race or the governor's race or city council member, all that information is together. And it's because of those efforts to promote transparency. And I think there really is a lot of work there. Kind of going with the first point, just in terms of the coordination with clerks. 4 years ago, I started the Idaho Elections Conference, which brings all the election officials across the state together. It's one of those, and for those of you who followed along, my journey, I always put it as, if I were Secretary of State, this is something I would do, and I chose just to do it anyways, because the need for professional development for the election staff, and when I say that, I don't mean the elected clerks. We get together for conferences anyways. It's actually my teams, the people training poll workers, the people doing the work, that need to do professional development and make sure we're learning from each other in terms of best practices, but also that we're learning from national experts, right, as we evolve. I mean, again, cybersecurity, new technology at the polls, making sure we're doing all of that. And so I see a ton of opportunity to bring that and be really a coordinating role. I think, too, my personality, I think it would be the same on the land board. I like to believe I have a very good rapport and with elected officials, the people I've worked with in the legislature, the people I've worked with in local governments, being somebody who can help bring people together to work through issues. And I think some of the sticky issues that the land board is addressing, I'm well suited, because of my prior work, to be in a position to work, for example, with the Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen's Association, right, as well as like Conservation Voters of Idaho, to deal with some of the issues like grazing leases and other things that are coming before the land board. You have to have someone willing to help bring people together, to try and translate how everyone is feeling and seeing things, to make sure we can pave a path forward. And I think that's something that would be really beneficial for the state right now.
Okay, we have some specific questions about the future of Idaho elections, but I want to take a glance back. Do you think that Joe Biden legitimately won the 2020 presidential election?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a very pointed question.
Well, it was a very direct question. In a campaign email newsletter that you sent out in February, you wrote, on election night in 2020, we all watched the horrors that were happening elsewhere in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Georgia, and others. Vote counts, quote, magically changing, transparency nowhere to be found, and massive piles of ballots suddenly appearing from big cities that changed whole states from red to blue before our eyes. That would suggest that you don't believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected. Which is it?
I think that's a very fair question. So that email that went out, I own it, has my name on it, but I hadn't approved it. I think you'll notice from any other emails that I've sent out since that has never been reiterated. And so, no, I do not believe ballots magically appeared anywhere. And it was my fault. I've changed my processes in terms of my campaign to make sure I approve all final messages that go out, specifically because I think Ben Souza serves as the chairman of my campaign. I think he was the first person to contact me when that email hit. And so I apologize to folks that was sent out, but I own the fact that it was. And so, no, I do believe, when it comes to the 2020 election, yes, I do believe that President Biden was elected the president. That said, I also believe, and I think this is really important to the dialogue that comes on, as an election professional and as actually somebody who was in the room where ballots were being counted and whose work is being questioned in this. And I think I'm the only person you're going to face throughout this entire process who was involved with the running of the 2020 election. One of the biggest things I find frustrating is the narratives that are going on nationally. So it's either, which you've already alluded to, Scott, the narrative that the election was stolen, there's rampant voter fraud on one end, or equally frustrating can be the narrative that there is absolutely no voter fraud and no examples of it. Neither of those are true, right? And I know this firsthand, and I think that's important because as we're having these dialogue and debates, it's not a healthy dialogue for the country. If we're going to be able to move forward, we need to have an honest look at what's happening. Part of why I know that those narratives aren't true is we have voter fraud cases here in Ada County. We have prosecutions in Ada County from the 2020 election, right? Now, that said, none of them are significant enough in terms of volume to change the outcomes of any of the elections. That includes the 2 votes election for the Ada County Highway District that we conducted the full recount for, right? And so I want to reiterate, our elections are secure. We should be proud of the elections that we have here in Idaho. But at the same time, we need to take it seriously. One of my favorite quotes I saw, it was a little over a year ago, came from Kim Wyman. She's the former Secretary of State of the state of Washington. She's the last statewide Republican in the state of Washington. And she pointed out that as these debates, it was related to H.R. 1, Congress's efforts to change, to nationalize some of our election efforts. She just pointed out that we need to be able to have honest conversations about these things because our country does have a history of voter fraud and our country does, in fact, have a history of voter suppression, right? And until we can make both elections accessible and secure, right, it's just partisan rhetoric going back and forth, and it's not healthy in terms of the discussion and debate. As someone who's been in the thick of it and working on these issues, I really do believe there are ways that we can strengthen our elections and make them secure, but at the exact same time, actually make voting more convenient and more available to the public. And it's one of the things that excites me about running for Secretary of State is to be able to advance those types of efforts because of my background and experience in running elections.
Okay, and so along those same lines in that same email, and I do want to, I hear what you're saying about this particular email, but I do want to ask you specifically about some of the other things that were in that email, saying that we all know what elections need to be. That means a proper secure count in person with photo ID and 100% reliable chain of custody. I'm going to ask you about the in person with photo ID. That would suggest that you wouldn't support absentee ballots, that elections need to be in person. So would you support mail-in ballots, absentee ballots?
Yes, I do. I think I support all the forms of voting that we have right now, right? So one of the great things about the state of Idaho is we have absentee ballots, we have in-person early voting, and we have election day voting. I think one of the most interesting trends, and maybe you are aware or not, is we've actually seen a decline, aside from 2020, a decline in the utilization of absentee ballots here in the state, with more people preferring in-person early voting. That's probably in part because of the efforts that we've led here in the state, specifically in terms of our efforts to make voting more accessible. I do think there are ways too, though. This is a good example that we can add additional security. It's interesting, my opinion. So I don't know if you're going to ask this next, but I'll touch on it anyways. My opinions about photo ID requirements at the polls have evolved over the course of my career. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the implementation of electronic poll books. So I don't know if any of you have voted in person in the past 2 years, but most of the state of Idaho has now transitioned to electronic poll books, which is basically an iPad type device. Instead of signing a paper poll book, you're checking in and you're signing on a digital device that is there. That has been transformative to our space in terms of how we run the elections, both on the back end side for us, but also what's neat, if you go to the polls, they'll ask you, say, all right, Scott McIntosh, and you hand them you show your driver's license, and they will just scan your driver's license. Rather than look you up by name, they'll just scan the barcode on the back of your license, and it will pull your name and voting information right up. And through that process, it also standardizes what happens at the polls, right? So it kind of is a tutorial for poll workers to make sure they do everything properly. But we collect so much more data and information now. So just in terms of stats from all of the Ada County voters over probably 5 elections now that I can think of that we've had e-poll books in use. It's kind of shocking to me, but 98% of voters who show up to the polls provide a driver's license. Not just photo ID, they specifically provide a driver's license. 1% provide a passport. Like those two capture 99% of the voters. The remaining 1% make up military IDs, concealed weapons permits, tribal IDs, student IDs, and personal ID affidavits. And I don't think in the conversations we've ever had that information to make informed choices. I do think we can tighten up and bolster the ID affidavit component that we have now to provide greater security measures around that, but also be able to make sure that we're not inadvertently turning someone away that shouldn't be turned away that would otherwise be eligible to vote. I think knowing that information, we can tighten that up. And so I think that fits in with some of the questions you're asking about in terms of, photo ID requirements. The same thing though, I do think absentee ballots work. I think it is tough. Absentee ballots are the least secure form of voting that we have. And that's not me just saying it in terms of rhetoric. As I jokingly point out, when we send absentee ballots out, one of the most difficult things is we send them out to the wild. Sometimes they look like they came back from the wild. So for example, twice now, a voter has sent us gummy bears along with their absentee ballot, right? My biggest pet peeve in terms of a voter was in 2020, where instead of just following the directions and filling in the box like the rest of you probably did here, they took an X-Acto knife and cut out the boxes for their votes. And we only see that behavior when ballots leave and come back, right? Or white out on them. I mean, we get money in some of them back, all sorts of things. In contrast, and really I'm a huge proponent of, is early voting. Early voting is the most secure form of voting. It is more secure than election day voting. And it's because of the technology and tools that we're able to deploy in that context where we're both providing convenience, right? You're downtown Boise, so you can pop into Boise City Hall and vote. But also we're providing additional security because if you vote early, it's communicating in real time to the other early voting locations that you already voted, or also it's communicating back to our office. So if you drop an absentee ballot, say in a USPS box right out in front of Boise City Hall, and then you go in and vote, you would be able to go and vote because we wouldn't have gotten the mail back. But our system would kick out immediately and we would never count that other ballot. There's no chance a ballot would ever be counted twice. And it's those kind of efforts where we are both expanding accessibility in terms of voting, while also increasing security. And I think with the concerns that we hear around the state, that is very important right now, because there are many people, regardless of my opinions and views, there are many people who have concerns about our elections.
So what needs to be done to restore faith and trust in the electoral process? What would you do to restore that faith and trust?
I think that one of the biggest things, and it actually, I think has been a challenging year for me personally, is wanting to speak out more in terms of what we do for our elections. So a great example of this, I was venting to someone earlier today about a questionnaire I received. So as candidates, we receive questionnaires from, you name it, we get questionnaires. And there was one, and one of the questions, it certainly had a tilt to it, a bunch of questions about elections because it's the Secretary of State's race. But one was like, as Secretary of State, would you advocate for cleaning up the voter rolls to remove dead people and felons from the voter rolls? And for me and my team here, like, we want to largely roll our eyes because we've been doing that for decades. This isn't new. It's not something that needs fixed because it's something we're doing ever since the implementation of the Idaho statewide voter registration system. We've been tied in with vital statistics and regularly cleaning up the rolls from vital statistic information as people pass. Similarly, we're tied into the Department of Corrections, and we routinely remove people who are convicted of felonies from the rolls. Oddly, the most common form of voter fraud case that we've had recently from 2020, we have 3 convictions for felons who voted when they weren't eligible to vote, right? And that is a reflection of the systems that we have in place. And so one of the biggest things, going to your question, is informing the public and letting them know about the safeguards that we do have in place behind the scenes. So much more is going on that people don't realize. Everyone just relates to their experience of going to the polling place and sticking their ballot in the ballot box. But there's a lot more that's happening. There's more that's happening in front of your eyes, and you just don't know it, in terms of when you sign those poll books or when you stick the ballot into the scanner, that is safeguarding our elections. And so to restore confidence, one of the big things for me is I've been traveling around the state, meeting with voters, is letting people know that we have a good system, answering their questions. Over the past year, I've probably given 20 tours of our elections office to walk those people who really are concerned about it and show them the room, show them the equipment, talk through our processes. And it's always an awesome experience for me to be able to do that and watch people their opinions change, right? Compared to what they read on the internet. Now they've seen it firsthand and they leave feeling really good about our elections. And I truly believe that just that first step of gaining confidence in your local elections is the first step to gaining confidence in the national elections. I do think there are things that we do need to work through as a country, though. There are so many differing rules, and we need to start working together as states in terms of how we communicate that information. In terms of preventing voter fraud, for example, we have a much stronger system within the state communicating between the 44 counties than we do between the 50 states. And we need to bolster and work as part of those efforts. And unfortunately, Idaho generally hasn't participated in some of the national efforts to share that information. But we do have, for example, we have two voter fraud cases where they are still in the process works, where it was people voting in two states. But it was because of us working together, sharing information with the Secretary of State's office and counties, clerk's offices in the other states to pursue that. But I think there is being able to speak out and share that information is really what's going to ultimately bring people's confidence back to our elections.
And does every county in Idaho have a paper trail for ballots?
Yes, every county, the legislature has said everyone votes on a paper ballot in the state of Idaho.
Okay.
And that's legislated.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about a couple of the pieces of legislation that came forward. And, specifically, we addressed the affidavit. It sounds like you were saying that you would support continuation of our affidavit election day system, but tighten it up. How would you?
With changes, I don't think as is, it does need to be strengthened. So one of the biggest things is right now the affidavit is you don't have photo ID. And I do support the idea of the state helping provide free photo IDs to those who need them, right? At the end of the day, I think most people want, I hear that over and over again. And as the stats show, overwhelmingly, people are very willing to provide identification. So I think the use of the affidavit needs to be limited. One of the biggest things that I've recommended is adding personal identifying information to the affidavit. So whether that's you provide your driver's license information, I know that sounds, backwards considering it, or you provide your date of birth or last four digits, your social security number, that information can easily be verified by a county clerk's office prior to issuing a ballot, right? So you provide information about you that we have on record from your voter registration information. We can validate that and then determine, yes, right, the information matches the person in front of me is that person. Go ahead.
And the electronic ballot, the electronic voting book says, "Oh, Scott McIntosh has not voted yet."
Yes, exactly. We have the safeguards in place. I think it's really that communication to use the tools that we have to do it, which isn't happening now. But part of it is having the voter provide information beyond just their name and address, provide information that is specific enough to the voter that we can verify, yes, this is the voter. I think, one of the things you'll hear, and I don't, now I'm going to get into the weeds because I'm an elections nerd, is like the discussion or debate between provisional ballots or not. Other states use provisional ballots rather than having election day registration. The challenges that presents are so large. Most states are envious of the systems that we have here. And you're seeing more states shift to what we're doing than the other way around, because of all the unintended consequences of having someone fill out a different colored ballot, having it stored separately, waiting for results. If just imagine what the ACHD District 2 race would look like if we had to wait weeks and weeks to decide which ballots would be counted or not. I think that's really complicated. So I think again, Idaho has some really good systems in place that have worked really well for us as a state. And, I don't think we should change something simply because, other states are making changes right now.
And so along with that was, and specifically student IDs, but also military IDs, and that was all kind of tied to proof of U.S. citizenship. How do you see that playing out if you're elected Secretary of State?
First and foremost, because it really did surprise me during this legislative session that there were proposals to make it much more difficult for specifically active duty military members to vote. Right? If there's anybody who's sacrificed and earned the right to vote, it's the people who are actually being shot at over in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever else in the country who are willing to put their lives at risk to protect the rest of our right to vote. And I think we owe it to those members. And I think you see that, whether that's the Uniformed Overseas Citizens Voting Act or the MOVE Act, those are two very specific efforts to ensure military members' right to vote is protected. And to have the idea that we're going to propose only letting them vote on federal candidates and that they shouldn't be entitled to vote for, say, governor or city council members or where their family may be still here in Idaho while they're overseas. Yeah, I don't know. As someone who does this work, it's shocking that someone would propose that. And I think the same thing, we need to make sure that everyone who has achieved the right to vote, right? So turning 18 has met the requirements, but we owe it to citizens. It is a right, right? It's a constitutional right that we should be protecting and preserving. And so we need to make sure when we put in safeguards, just like my comment earlier in terms of making it both accessible and secure, our security, you can make it so secure that no one has the right to vote, right? You can also make it so accessible that it introduces rampant fraud, but we have to always balance both those sides of those coins in this space. And I think we can do that with student IDs. It's the same thing. I think right now, rather than saying no student IDs, let's establish criteria that any type of ID that you're going to use meets these certain criteria, or whether making it, an expiration date so it's current, having personal information related to the voter on it. I think we can actually come to a common consensus about what are the criteria that we want to have in terms of IDs. I do think it's a good effort for us to start tracking, especially the introduction of the STAR card is kind of an interesting development in all of this about citizenship, right? Because it is a requirement that someone is a citizen to vote. What my concern is, again, with these narratives, so working with the Secretary of State's office this last year, they sent each of the counties a list of people that they were concerned were non-citizens voting. So in our case, there was 140 names on that list. And as far as I know, Ada County's probably put the most effort into pursuing and looking into that. My concern is, though, at first blush, we just took the list on face value and said, let's start contacting voters. Well, right away when we did that, one of the people who we questioned their citizenship was a veteran who had served 2 terms in Afghanistan. And I can assure you, anybody who feels offended by having their citizenship questioned is somebody who put in multiple tours. And so we started to really step back and evaluate the information. And it's more of a record keeping information issue for the state. Of those 140, we narrowed it down to 6 that are actually potentially non-citizens that really need to be vetted. And it's because we partnered with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and ICE to be able to vet some of that information, to use real databases where we track citizenship as a country. And I think it's those partnerships between agencies that is really important. No single office should take these on by themselves. It should be a partnership through whether it's state agencies or federal agencies to do whatever we can to secure our vote, but also to make sure we aren't preventing somebody who should be allowed to vote from voting. That often gets lost in these conversations, that denying someone's right to vote is also something that we want to avoid at all costs.
No, and I think that is part of the dichotomy. There's certain folks who believe that we're gonna, we might disenfranchise one legal voter, but we're gonna catch 100 illegal voters. But some of us feel that you might have one illegal voter, but that doesn't mean we should pass laws that disenfranchise 100 legal voters. Where on that spectrum do you think you lie?
Yeah, I think to that exact same thing. So some of the proposals that came through the legislative session this year, again, just looking at the rough numbers here in Ada County, I don't think the 299,993 other of us should have to find our birth certificates and prove that we were born in the United States, because we do have potentially 6 people that we need to prevent who are attempting to vote when they shouldn't, right? Again, goes to that balance. And so we need to be more thoughtful in terms of using the tools and the information we already have. That's where those partnerships. I am always concerned, as someone who's worked in elections, about making sure we're trying to make voting accessible. If anything, one of the things I would love to see is just increased participation and engagement, right? When we have low turnout and we put the amount of effort and energy we put in, we want to see. The whole idea of a democratic republic is to have people speak up and elect their representatives. That's the idea of a republic, is that the people going to the state house are representing the people from their districts, right? And the only way that happens is if the community is engaged in selecting those people. And so I want to make sure we're actually getting more engagement in this process, not trying to put up more barriers to people's access to be able to vote.
So that's my next question. Some of us believe that we should be making it easier to vote, and we did see mail-in ballots for some of us who have never ever voted by mail. Found it amazingly, surprisingly convenient, and it gave me more time to look over. I found mail-in ballot. It was a much better way to do it. How would you, as Secretary of State, make it easier for people to vote and increase our voter participation?
I'll start by saying, this feels funny for me. I don't think that you will meet somebody who has already put more effort and energy into expanding access to voting than I have here in the state of Idaho. And I can point to multiple examples. One of the best, Ada County was recognized, I think it was in 2017, by Fast Company for one of our world changing ideas. And that was the introduction of our mobile voting unit, right? Where out in Star, out in Cuna, or Garden City, which is oddly the most popular place for the voting unit, where we actually have early voting moving around, and we have the security tools to expand access. And when you look at the numbers, if you were to go back and look at what early voting was, say in 2010, where it was in the thousands, to now we have well over 50,000 people just in Ada County alone who choose to vote early. It's because we've made it more accessible and expanded that. And I'm not even talking about moving forward. I'm just talking about what we have accomplished, right? And that interplay is we've been able to increase security as well as increase convenience. And one of the ways I know we've increased security is because of the introduction of the mobile voting unit. One of the things that we had to do is prove the resilience of that in terms of cybersecurity threats. So in 2016, we were ahead of the curve nationally. We had hired cybersecurity professionals to do penetration testing of our systems, because before we put that in use, we needed to be able to prove, that no one was tampering with what we were doing. And so we've since done that multiple times, where we've brought in cybersecurity experts to test our systems to make sure we are resilient. And I'm proud to say that we've been able to do that, and we've expanded. If you live in Star, you shouldn't have to drive into Meridian or Boise to be able to vote, right? Just because people who live there have that access because they're in the population centers. One of the big things, the opportunities I see for a state, and I actually think it really proves on numerous levels a huge opportunity. I introduced a draft bill during the special legislative session aimed at this, is to expand the technology and tools that we have in early voting, which add additional security and convenience, but to do that on election day. The process we currently have of your voting precinct being the place that you vote, right, is really a reflection of just the logistics of running an election, right? So we have so many different types of ballots. So for the upcoming election here in May, in Ada County alone, we'll have about 1,000 different ballot choices that people can choose from, right? They don't get to choose from each one, but in terms of what they're eligible for. So as a logistics, we break it up into precincts, right? So that we only have, 6 or 7 different ballots in one given precinct for the poll workers to choose from and get to the right voter. One of the greatest tools that we've implemented starting in 2012 was printing ballots on demand. When you go to an early voting location, you show your driver's license, the e-poll book looks you up, and then we print you your specific ballot right there. There aren't even ballots to tamper with because we haven't even created them until you, the voter, are standing there and you actually witness your ballot being created. And then we ensure that even though you're voting in Boise, but you live in Kuna, you get the right ballot, right? The added benefit to that, the huge benefit on both sides, is you no longer have to race back home to vote. The busiest hours on election day are between 5 and 6 p.m. And it's because voting is based on where your home residence is, right? And most people don't work at home. So if you work in Boise but live in Kuna, you have to race through traffic on the connector to get back to Kuna to vote in time. And we always see this scramble. And the number one reason all sorts of polling information shows that people don't vote is they're too busy, right? They're too busy with work. They're too busy taking the kids to soccer or whatever else. It's a Tuesday. If you could just go to the nearest vote here sign. So, you're in downtown, you just go to the vote here sign downtown and they print you your ballot and voting. That's transformative. And it's why we've seen such an increase in the use of in-person early voting, is because of that convenience. You can just go at a break while you're at work rather than having to race back, right? And don't have it disrupt your life to be able to vote, but you can still do it in a very secure forum, right? Or even in the same manner in which you've done traditionally, right? There's the people who love to go to the polls. I mean, I voted stickers are one of the most important things in voting because every voter wants them to show it's a point of pride that people have their I voted sticker, right? And so we can combine all of that through this effort. And I do think as technology has advanced, it's allowed us opportunities to both strengthen our system, but also to provide access. And as Secretary of State, hopefully my work precedes me and it shows that I would be an advocate to provide and expand the opportunity to vote and hopefully get more people engaged in our elections.
But doesn't that expansion open up the possibility for, hundreds of Canadians to come across the border and pretend that they're Americans and vote in the legislative district 1 election?
Absolutely not. I mean, the whole point of bringing up those examples for early voting is the most secure form because we have the technology and tools to check and verify that someone isn't voting twice, or we can check and verify people's information. So actually what we would be doing is bolstering the existing system that we have while expanding access. The notion that allowing people to exercise their right to vote is a problem when they're eligible to vote, I just fundamentally disagree with. If anything, we want people to be engaged. One of the most depressing elections I can recall was last May. It was the Meridian Library District. We ran an election and the turnout across all forums was 1.9%. There is no one who thinks that 1.9% turnout is a reflection of the community will regarding the library district, right? It's what I like to refer to as a friends and family election. Like whoever gets the most friends and family out to vote wins. We jokingly said, because it's the infrastructure of us doing that election still costs just like it does for a higher turnout election. And so it would have been better off for us to donate $80,000 to the library to buy books than I think what that was a reflection of for the city of Meridian, right? And so we need to look at ways that we can get more people engaged and still prevent the errant Canadian who's going to try and vote. I don't see that as a problem. I don't think there's examples of, we don't see Canadians coming and trying to vote, right? And so I think this is just fitting into a larger narrative that people are trying to play without examples. But regardless of whether it's a Canadian or anybody else who's trying to interfere in our system, we do have good safeguards in place, and we do have the opportunity to even strengthen those safeguards more without interfering with people's ability to vote.
And so that raises the question of election consolidating dates. The notion is that, it's convenient to have 4 dates to run an election, but then you run an election in May or in August, and the turnout is just historically awful. Is that an argument for consolidating elections into just November or just 2 days out of the year?
I think there's an important conversation that needs to be had there. So my career has expanded the entire scope of this conversation, right? So when I started, cities were running their elections, school districts were running their elections, fire districts. So we would be conducting election at the same time the fire district is conducting election, but they would use different polling places than we were. So first, I just want to acknowledge we've made great strides, right? When the legislature worked to consolidate to where we are. And many people don't realize that that happened. And there was a lot of negotiations between the entities to get there. I also think one of the best things that came out of that was the professionalizing of our elections, right? I have a team of dedicated professionals that this is what they do. They run elections. And that's vastly different from having the school district clerk whose job is completely unrelated to election administration, trying to figure out the intricacies of election administration. That said, I do think we are at that point where you alluded of continuing that conversation. What does consolidation look like, especially across the days? Because we still do have lower turnout on some of those days, but it's not so easy as have one election every 4 years, right? Which I think some people, that's their like ideal. There are trade-offs when you make these decisions, not just in the impacts, but even just the impacts to voting itself. So for example, in the state of Florida, because they have so many different entities, they can have up to a 6-page ballot. Again, that's a reflection. When you consolidate more things, the length of the ballot expands. We actually study and monitor this here locally. Is the longer the ballot is, the more the drop-off happens. So I can remember, I think it was the 2014 election. So it's been a while for this example, but there was a CWI question on the bottom of the ballot, right? You go down, it was a 2-page ballot. I think it was like 98% of people had voted on the first contest on the ballot. Only 60 people had actually gotten to the last question on the ballot. 40% of the people who were in the voting booth with a pencil in hand did not vote on the issue. Or the same thing in the ACHD race. So ACHD District 2, if you talk to the candidates that were involved, that race was 2 votes apart out of 40,000 votes cast. That's less than 0.005% difference. And as someone who's run for office, and I'm sure Christy can attest to this as well, you can easily find 2 people who told you they were going to vote, but that didn't actually get there, right? That's very easy. What's more shocking though, in that race, 10,000 people did not vote for either candidate. They were there, they voted for president, but they did not vote. So although it was 2 votes apart, 10,000 people, it's not getting someone to actually show up. Even the people who were there, most of them chose not to exercise their right because of the amount of information on the ballot. So as we can put more things on the ballot, to your question, it gets harder for the voters. I actually think there's a really opportunity. I've pitched it to some legislators to say, what if, as we discuss consolidating a little bit further, especially with those March and August dates, and I know school boards, those are important dates, we actually look at providing a voter guide and voter information in advance of the election. Other states do it. Idaho does not. One of the best things we could do is provide the information and tools to the voter so that then when they see the ACHD race, they actually knew it was going to be on their ballot in advance rather than learning it for the first time when they're in the voting booth and not knowing what to do in that moment. I think there's a real opportunity to help provide greater education, which will also provide greater engagement in terms of voting. And that might help address it. But also we need to keep that balance, and we can't overly consolidate because we'll just create other unintended consequences and won't achieve the actual aim at higher turnout or other things that we purport to be advocating for.
So we got a couple other things non-election related, but I do want to just real quickly get your thoughts on the proposal to eliminate drop boxes. Should we keep drop boxes?
I think we should. This is as someone who's really close to this issue, as you can probably appreciate. One, I've learned more about drop boxes in the last 2 years than I ever wanted to. For example, our drop boxes have fire suppression systems in them. I didn't know that was a thing. They are very secure. They're monitored. But more important to this discussion is the United States Postal Service has boxes all throughout the community. Our boxes are substantially more secure than a USPS box. And oddly, the reason that we expanded the number of drop boxes that we have in Ada County was because during the 2020 election, there were fears expressed about the Postal Service, either delays in the Postal Service or people handling ballots more than necessary. And so we expanded it as an alternative that if someone's not sure, right, but they want to drop off their absentee ballot, and we see this, they'll go use the drop boxes. I'm surprised to see the legislature take up that issue. If we have concerns related to fraud, there's other safeguards to address that. With signature verification and other things that we do, the boxes themselves aren't where we should focus. We should focus on other aspects of that voting process.
And it sounds like you would be much more active with the legislature. I know the current Secretary of State is very hands off with the legislature, does not want to propose legislation, does not want to get involved in legislation, doesn't really want to weigh in one way or the other for the most part, if you're elected, would you be more active in working with legislators to try to get some of these bills passed or shot down?
Yeah, I think and not even to make the contrast with Secretary Denny, but in terms of, I think you have seen my active role in terms of, I sit as the chair of the elections committee for the Idaho Association of County Recorders and Clerks. I've been very active in discussions with the legislature. I don't see that continuing. I do see it as an important advisory role for legislators. One of the things that's really important is it is the legislature who dictates and determines how our elections are run. And I think recognizing the various, the three branches of government, that's an important acknowledgement, is that they will set the rules. This is an executive branch function, but elections are complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. And actually, as we saw with some of the legislation introduced, one of the first expansive election bills was inadvertently going to implement massive federal legislation unintentionally, as well as have a whole series of ripple effects to our elections. And it was because of not having that consultation with the people who do this work where the problems came in. And so I would want to really partner with legislators. I think I have a very good working relationship with the legislature on both sides. And so I would want to continue that. So hopefully I can, serve as a confidant and somebody who's willing to work with them to make sure we have the very best election system in the country.
Campaign finance transparency. Is there more we can do, and what would you do if you were Secretary of State to increase that?
I think there's quite a bit we can do. One, like I mentioned, there was 2 years, there was interim committees on campaign finance reform. I was very heavily involved with those committees, working with Chairman Wood and Chairwoman Lodge to try and advise them. I wrote a letter to all the committee members early on, and I think this is important in terms of so many people really want to get to enforcement of our campaign finance laws, right? But before you do that, there's so many other things that need to come into play. And first and foremost is just making them simple for people to comply with. If you look at candidates, the average candidate, their treasurer is likely either their spouse or their friend, right? And so these laws are not inherently easy to navigate if you look through our sunshine laws. So I think actually one of the biggest things we need is just to simplify and clarify them. Because if candidates are willing to comply with the laws, I don't see people generally trying to cheat. I see people trying hard to comply. They're just confused, right? And so we need to make it simple. Once we make it simple, then we can add on transparency, which is what you see the upgrades of, like centralizing all that information, because we should see who's influencing our elections. It's always a surprise. One of my favorite trivia questions when I go out, I have data visualizations related to campaign finance information, is the largest contributor to PACs in the state of Idaho. And this has been pretty consistent a couple of years. It just kind of depends on which state, which cycle is, so for 2014 and 2016, I believe it was, the largest contributor to PACs in the state of Idaho was the Democratic Party of the state of Georgia. In 2018, it was the Democratic Party of the state of Arizona. That's not dark money. That's publicly reported money. It's just so obscured in the systems that we have that even informed people don't realize that that's occurring. Of the top 10 donors to PACs, most of them are all out of state, right? And the public should know that information. We need the whole idea of campaign finance and transparency is to inform, whether it's the media, the candidates, the public. I think we can still continue to build and bolster that. And once you get those two pieces right, then you can hit enforcement and making sure people are complying. Because no longer do people have the excuse of like, well, I was trying, I didn't understand. Now we can actually address some of the loopholes and other things. And so I think there is, to the short version of that lengthy answer is there is opportunities to continue to build on transparency in the state of Idaho.
And so, are you happy with the system that got rolled out?
I am happy because I think it's been a huge improvement. I also do see a lot of opportunities to expand on that improvement. And actually, funny enough, I was talking to the vendor who built Sunshine, the recent one earlier today, and we were discussing some of the opportunities, like to bring in past data and do other things related to that.
Okay. All right. And I do want to get to land board because that's an important function. What's your position on the best use of state endowment lands? Sell them, manage them, swap them? What's your kind of overall philosophy approaching state endowment lands?
So first and foremost, I mean, the purpose of the endowment lands, the land board is a trust. And I think that's really important for people to recognize. The beneficiaries are, right, the school kids, so public education, the universities, right, I mean, we can go through the list of veterans. And it's important that the land boards recognize their fiduciary role in terms of managing that trust. And the Constitution is clear about that. But to one point in your question is, it's not just for today, it's into the future, right? It's hopefully my great grandkids that will be beneficiaries of this system. And I think that's sometimes being lost in these conversations, is that we need to look at how to manage those lands as an endowment so that they return, which has really worked well when we look at the agricultural uses that we've had, right? Whether that's grazing, but the big one being timber harvest, right? Is it's a renewable source, and we've managed it well. One of the big challenges we're facing or seeing, and we could talk about multiple examples, but as more people, the population grows in the state of Idaho and the demand for land grows, we're getting this tension of maximizing the value when all of a sudden the soil underneath the trees is becoming more valuable than what's being harvested on top of them. But I still think we have to look at that seriously and try to figure out how can we manage that for the future. And some of that may be expanding the portfolio beyond just timber harvest to look at other means that we get a return. If we push too hard, if we sell the land, yes, property values are high right now. But any of us who have watched or who've lived here know that land's going to continue to appreciate. It's not just high now. There's no signs of slowing in terms of the growth to the state and what the land value is. And we need to recognize that and manage that as a resource. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity, but also we have to really make sure we partner with all the users of the land. One of the biggest challenges the land board faces is many people like to recreate on state endowment lands and don't realize that their purpose is not for mountain biking, right? Their purpose is for the beneficiaries. And we need to better educate and work with people to find opportunities. But even with recreation, I was meeting with Susan Buxton recently, just talking about our park system. There's enough demand that there are opportunities even for recreational related revenue, right? And we should explore those things. So maybe we can have the best for future generations where we're both gaining a return, but also using it in a way that the public can benefit from those lands more widely, right? So as a land board member, I think one of the biggest things is I'm very committed to meeting with people to understand and look at all the approaches. Philosophically, I would like to see these lands available for as long as possible, because when you look at the eastern states, they also receive federal land but had sold them off, they no longer have the great benefit that we have in the state of Idaho. And it's a lot of what attracts people to the state.
I'm gonna have to go back to the recording and see how many greats you put in that great grandchildren.
Yes, exactly.
Any questions? Any other questions? Follow-up questions from board members?
I had one really quickly. Phil, with the mobile voting, have other counties picked that up? Is that still just an Ada County thing? Have you seen some other counties try something similar, or where does that stand?
So I'm going to say yes and no, because I think your question's more nuanced than you realize it is. We've had other counties in the state of Idaho explore it, but no one else has implemented it in the state of Idaho. But we have had other counties throughout the United States contact us and employ it. So I know it's been employed. Our model has been deployed like in Arizona. The biggest surprise was Los Angeles County contacted us, and they're large enough that they contacted 3 different entities that were doing it and deployed. They tested it out by doing the Ada County model, I think the North Carolina model, right? They're just at a scale that my head can't quite comprehend, but we have seen it modeled. I was fortunate enough to give a talk in TEDx Boise sharing it. And so we get inquiries periodically from across the country of people who've seen what we've done and want to learn, and we do have a lot of lessons learned from the implementation of that.
Right. But within Idaho, it sounds as if, if a county has the wherewithal to do it, it sounds as if that's something you would very much like to, pursue and encourage.
One of the biggest things with it is one is financial resources, right? Not all the counties have the financial resources to afford something like that. 2 is the just does it fit the need? My example of Star, right? Like, what does the makeup? Every community is different. It's just like mail ballot precincts. We do have precincts in the state of Idaho where people only vote by mail. But that's because it fits the very rural nature of those communities. We don't do that here for obvious reasons, right? And so I think every community, we need to base it similarly. One thing, just as a note on that, one of the things I would do, this comes out of the 2020 election for sure, is just advocating for the resources. We talk a lot about the security of our elections or elections integrity. You'll hear candidates across many offices mention elections integrity. One of the biggest things we need to do is make sure we're putting our resources towards that, right? It's easy to say it, but if you don't put the resources towards it, that creates a lot of different problems. And it's something that we've seen. It's certainly been an issue in the campaign. Is during the 2020 election, for example, it was taxing to make sure Scott could vote by absentee ballot, right? Because of the convenience and other things, and an overwhelming number of people took advantage of that, but also still have in-person voting and still make sure all those systems are secure. It requires resources. And as Secretary of State, I would be an advocate for the counties to make sure that we are investing in our elections. I think elections integrity starts not just by good policy, but also investing in the infrastructure to support that policy.